from its embryonic stages through to its first concert performance, the peaks and troughs of composing, now BBC Two, for the BBC Young Musicians.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's concert, which is being recorded for Radio 3. It features the music of 5 composers who've been working over the last couple of days with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, leader Alison Kelly, and its associate principal conductor, Martyn Brabbins.
Music is my main joy, and that's all I do, really. Everything I do revolves around music.
I've enjoyed the challenge of having lots of instruments to write for.
If you're a composer, you're supposed to live all on your own and be some kind of hermit, which I think is absolute rubbish.
I'd say I was fairly obsessed, sort of just getting everything down on paper.
I'm not really worried if people like my music or not. If people do like it and can get something out of it, then that's really good.
These 5 young composers were chosen to come to Glasgow from over 70 who submitted scores to this year's BBC Young Musicians Young Composers Workshop, supported by Lloyds Bank. On the selection panel was conductor Martyn Brabbins.
I think we chose a fantastic bunch of young composers. All 5 pieces are winners.
The other panel members were 2 established composers, Judith Bingham and James MacMillan, who were to lead our 3-day workshop.
It's always a moment of truth, hearing a piece for the first time. I suppose you have a blueprint of the sound in your mind, but it never stops being a thrill for any composer, hearing it take on sort of living flesh.
With an orchestral piece, you've got all these people sitting there, and it's very hard. And when you're young, you do feel very, very exposed. It's quite a grueling experience.
Jimmy and MacMillan perhaps made their task even harder by asking the young composers to write variations on an unusual theme he'd found. It was an old Scottish plain chant called Salve Splendor, which was dedicated to St. Columba. Columba brought Christianity to Scotland from Ireland in the 6th century. He landed first on the island of Iona, from where his followers spread the gospel throughout much of Scotland. The plain chant was found in the abbey on the tiny island of Inchcolm in the Firth of Forth. I asked Jimmy why he chose it.
It's a very long theme. It's like a hymn to St. Columba. It has some beautiful rises and falls in the melody. There are moments in it where it moves on to a completely new register. It gives so much scope, I think, to a composer.
Salve splendor et agrone ubaque justitiae, orthodox et doctor bone pastor et vas gratiae. O
when Jimmy produced the theme, I looked at it and I thought, my God, how would I even begin to approach this? It's very challenging.
I chose it because I was very interested to see what different composers could make of it, either by changing it completely, by expanding it to become something else, by ignoring certain aspects of it and concentrating on maybe the hidden aspects of the music that they themselves might be able to expand on.
2 months after being given the plain chant, the composers got together in London for the first time to check on progress and to compare notes.
That's one thing that I don't want that to happen.
At 16, Thom Petty from Macclesfield in Cheshire is the youngest of our 5. He'll take his A-levels next year and intends to study medicine.
Not exactly simultaneously, but certainly.
The concerto for orchestra.
Tom Young is 18 from Lancing in Sussex. He'll be going to Cambridge University this autumn to read music.
Contemporary to the plain chant kind of approach in a way. You sort of started from that.
24-year-old Fraser Maitland is studying at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama and already has a first degree in chemical engineering from Edinburgh University.
I'm a little unsure as to how it's going to sound.
Yeah.
A vertical intensity.
Karen Smith is 23 and comes from Northampton. She's currently studying for a master's degree in composition at the Royal Academy of Music in London.
Well, this is deeply impressive, Nathan, because you've finished and you've produced a very beautiful score.
Nathan Rose is 24 and is studying for an MA in Music and Philosophy at the Birmingham Conservatoire. He comes from Stourbridge in the West Midlands.
This theme has obviously posed some very personal, difficult problems for these composers, and they've all felt the need to deconstruct it before they can actually do variations on it. But interestingly, they've all done it in a very different way.
Yes, I mean, I'm glad that they didn't find it easy. I'm glad that they were forced to really think hard about what they could do with a theme like this, because it wasn't natural to them. And I think when you're really challenged like that, it can sometimes bring about your best music.
It was a cold and snowy March morning, and before the composers arrived for the weekend workshop, Martyn Brabbins ran through each of their pieces with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra. It gave the players an opportunity to sort out a few difficulties.
Stop, please. I have a bassoon in 259.
261, should I have anything into?
Yeah, F, A sharp. I'll check the part in the break, and likewise with the first bassoon. R then, please. R. 2. There are bound to be problems. There are bound to be things that aren't quite right in the parts, things that don't work on certain instruments, things that are missing, things that we can add. And with an orchestra as experienced as this at playing new music, it's second nature to them. So when I get to 190, I'm getting faster. You just play your phrase, and it should thereabouts fit in terms of time, but it'll bear no relation to what I'm doing. And then Jan, you start at O, yeah? So
I follow you and
he doesn't.
In 102, it says...
Soltando, I know. Yeah, I know. It's very fast pitch. Yeah, we'll talk to him about it. I realise it's not practical, but you ought to discuss that with him. On camera. In a nice way.
Just to say a few words about what's going to be happening this afternoon and what you should try to get out of it. Feel free to use the orchestra as a kind of resource. If you wanted to experiment with something, say you found that a flute solo didn't work on the flute or at that register, say, well, what would happen if we put it up the octave? Or if you wanted to try out the solo or the part on another instrument, the next time we come round to your piece, you could have copied it out for a saxophone or a clarinet or something.
I'd just like to say at the start of all of this, just well done to everybody for getting here and just all writing such different pieces. I mean, thank God you've all written interesting pieces and all different.
About 6 months ago, I thought of the title acousticophobia. Obviously, it means a sort of fear of sound, and I think that's probably brought about by my sort of fear of looking at the Gregorian chant and thinking, what am I going to do with this? My piece begins with a minor second, whereas the actual chant starts with a major second, which is those notes. I just changed it to that, just to get away from the serene feel of this music. It's actually quite a quick start. I've got quite a punchy rhythm. It's flying notes around different instruments in the orchestra. So there's no chance to sit back and think, this is nice. The middle section, which is slow, is fairly laid back. It's exploring the little finer detail of the chant.
Thomas, would you like a motor on the vibraphone?
I wasn't really sure because I don't know much about it, so kind of maybe experiment and see.
Yeah. What are you doing at the moment, Heather? Can we hear the first bar then? With. We've heard it without.
Yes, it's lovely. Nice.
You like that?
Yeah, motor on, I think.
With.
At the start of writing this, I didn't have any idea how the piece was going to finish. I think it's very difficult to imagine the sort of detail of it. But I knew it was going to be a quick section, and it was going to end with a bang. It brings out the whole chant in 6 different keys at once. So the end, with all the theme in its entirety, is sort of going...
Thom Petty included an alto saxophone and contrabassoon in his piece, as well as a lot of percussion and, interestingly, a harpsichord.
Good. The thing that really bothers me at the end is the harpsichord.
Right.
It's just totally inaudible, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping...
It's got to be inaudible, doesn't it? I wonder if we can get it amplified.
Yeah. I wanted to add a more...
It can't.
punchy.
It can't play any louder. I don't think.
Can it be microphone?
We can see if we can mic it. Yeah.
We'll do that.
Wondering whether, at the end, whether the percussionists have got any sandpaper blocks hanging around.
They will have. Definitely.
If one of them could just play the same rhythms as the bongo part on the sandpaper blocks.
I'm sure they'll have some. I'll ask. Heather, do you have your sandpaper with you today?
I think there's about sort of 80% there. I wasn't too adventurous with it, so there wasn't much to sort of go wrong, or go wrong as I would see it, but I think it was pretty much how I thought it would be.
Tell me about the plain chant which you were given as a basis for the piece. Did you find it quite constraining?
I thought it was helpful, actually, because I kind of get composer's block, if you want to call it that, and having that there to kind of go back to and everything was really good, because I could say, oh, what am I going to do next? Have a look at it. Oh, I'll have this bit in here. So it was actually really helpful, and I don't think I'd have been able to do it as well if I didn't have that sort of plain chant to go back to.
I think Thom Petty's piece is great because it's like he's decided to really go against the theme. He's had a sort of reaction against it. And it's very fresh. I like that. It's a very fresh feeling. It's quite interesting because generally you don't do variations on a theme that you react against.
Before I even start to write notes down, I like to sort of write ideas down in sort of words, brainstorm basically, and if I think some of the ideas are worth pursuing, I sort of experimenting with notes. When we were first given this, I think most of us were quite surprised. To me, it didn't lend itself to any of the traditional approaches to theme variations. So the way I tackled it was to sort of try and be imaginative and see it from several different angles. And what I've ended up with is a piece with 3 main movements which sort of approach the theme in different ways, with a slow introduction.
Let's hear the trumpets alone. This is Harmon mutes.
Right.
With stalks in, is that right at the moment? How are the bits that go in and out? I can't see them, that's all. I can't see, right. Fine. So they're in. Here we go. 3, 4. Okay. And with them out, extend them a little bit. Ooh, that's horrid. Put them back in. 5 then, everyone. And 1.
I was interested to know how Thom had developed the plain chant.
There are various things you can do with that, and one of the things I tried was putting that theme into a mode. So, for example, every time it's a D natural, it will come out as a D flat. Equally, what interested me was the lack of rhythmical variety, really, in the original theme. And I was trying to think of ways of producing rhythms without just thinking up my own rhythms and imposing them on it, and to try and extract a rhythm from the original theme. And although it only uses quavers, there are sort of rhythms implied within it by the use of slurs. So in fact, this could become a crotchet and a quaver. Because the first 2 quavers are slurred together, and that was the way I looked at the whole theme. I then tried to combine the 2, and effectively ended up with this. The first time that theme comes in the scherzo movement, played on an E-flat clarinet.
crescendo, just on the last note.
The last movement, as a contrast to the approach in the other movements, uses just 3 notes on the theme. It comes out in trumpets and rises up. Just when it seems to be reaching a glorious finale, it goes slightly mad. Instruments doing all sorts of wild things. There's a part for the piano which you have to hit with your fists. And just as it's reaching a sort of mad climax, everything stops. And you're just left with sort of questioning ending, I suppose.
Thank you and good afternoon. So, Tom, first impressions, was it what you expected?
No, on all counts, really. I mean, certain aspects of it were very helpful, and others were a bit worrying, but...
What were the worrying things, if you can focus on those?
I basically hadn't had time to think about what the orchestra would be like. They were friendly and to an extent helpful, but there were times when I felt surprised by how quick things had to go. I suppose that was the logistics of the occasion, but, you know, Martyn Brabbins would come over and ask me something, and I'd hardly had time to answer before he'd be away and changing it, and I just felt it was a little out of my control.
Maybe not the mallets.
I've been very impressed by both these pieces this afternoon, and it's incredible to think that both composers, both Toms, are still teenagers. And already they've managed to get to grips with how to write for an orchestra. They score for the orchestra very, very well, expertly, I would say.
After the rehearsal, Heather showed Thom Petty some unusual instruments he could try for the end of his piece.
So then I began to think about this, and I thought, well, maybe cabassa. Then I thought, well, maybe a larger cabassa. I don't know, maybe a big shaker.
I mean, I was hoping for something which could kind of be really tight with the...
Is it a more sort of scrapey sound you want?
something that can stop immediately.
Ah, well, in that case, we might be able to use something like... That's a sort of plastic guiro. I've also got a wooden one here, which is also another sound.
That'll certainly carry through.
Yes. The other thing I've got here is one of these little miniature things. Great things, these. I think it's terribly difficult for you composers, sometimes, particularly with percussion. I mean, you know, you know the sound of a cello and what it does, and the trombones and that. But for us, I mean, it's the sound effects department. You get a sound, and you know, but the trouble is actually reproducing it. You know, but we find it great fun.
Just play us a little bit of the tom-tom rhythm, just to hear what that sounds like.
Yes. Yeah?
I think I'll have to try them both and see which one works.
The start of day 2, and Fraser Maitland's piece is rehearsed.
3 and...
Fraser did a lot of background research and found that St. Columba claimed to have seen angels and to have had other visions.
The main structure for the piece was based on St. Columba himself and just the idea that he beheld the world as just this ray of concentrated light that just went on forever. I mean, it was just the entire time the universe has existed or whatever. And that gave rise to just this straight line going through the whole piece, which you don't hear throughout the whole piece. I mean, you do hear it the beginning, the end, and briefly in the middle again. And then over that, you've got this sort of circle structure, which is almost sort of movable, if you like, along the line, and it doesn't really matter where you were to put it. And that's essentially the structure, just with a straight line and the circle in which all this sort of thematic material happens. It starts with the piano really, and the strings sort of gently in the background, and the piano just plays one little very simple monotonous line that just carries on steadily, and the strings sort of grow, and in growing weaken, if you like, sort of dividing all the time, sort of opening out into this circular structure.
Orchestral players have to rely on information about dynamics and phrasing written into their parts to help them interpret the music as the composer wants it to sound. The notes by themselves aren't enough. So it's up to the composer to make sure that all these markings are written in. But too much is missing from Fraser's parts.
Because that's going to be contrast in the horn. Call yours piano then. Fraser, the dynamics, I'm having to make up dynamics here, because you haven't got enough dynamics in the part.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time. You really need...
I thought that would be the case as well.
That's right, it should be an
A flat, at letter E. At E, yes. Right. Where do you play then?
Well, it's not clear. That's what I'm asking. I mean, I'm not sure whether I meant to come in at 79 or come in at 81.
All right.
Well, there's no dynamics.
I know.
Right.
Should we give you a dynamic? 40! It's ever so time consuming. You're not hearing what you've written, because that's what orchestra's like. All they want to be done is, how loud, how short, how fast, how slow. Very simple, but you have to be more detailed with it. So it's a good lesson. Yeah. But we'll have to get on with it now and forget some of the details, I'm afraid. Otherwise, we're not going to get through to the end, and they'll suffer. It all boils down to exactly the same thing, I think, for all of them. It's lack of experience. And that's what we're here to give them, experience, and they can only learn from it. I think what you need to do is work out the crucial dynamic problems that you've got, take the parts in and do them.
Yeah.
Hello. M for melee.
Mezzo piano.
Mezzo piano.
Yeah. There wasn't enough dynamics actually marked, and the general dynamics had been marked in the score that hadn't been put through onto the separate parts. So, case of taking all the parts away and going through them and just marking in all the dynamics and various things.
So the fault, if there is a fault, lies with the part copier, mainly?
I think it's just, it's more my fault. It's a case of not really knowing sort of correct etiquette to how to mark things up.
There's two types of music in this piece. There's this incredible expansiveness that you get at the opening, and there's almost a kind of humorous quirkiness about some of the other themes. And the challenge of writing music like that, where there are at least two extremes, is to allow the extremes to coexist and to make sense as a structure. And I think he's almost got it, but possibly the the eventual structure should have expanded even more to take account of the vast extremes between the music that's included in the piece.
I think once you accept that that's how the piece is, and, you know, there's no real straightforward path you can follow through it, then I think it really does work. I think he's created a very original sound world.
Even before his rehearsal is over, Fraser starts putting new dynamic markings into his score. It's going to be a long job. Like Fraser, Karen Smith decided to write a single movement piece.
When I first start composing, I don't work at the keyboard at all. I don't want to be limited by my own disabilities at the piano, really. I think my imagination is greater than that. When I got the piece and I brought it back, I experimented with different modes. I took out all the repeated notes because there were so many of them to see what was left. And then I came up with using the very opening phrase, the first 5 notes. And a phrase that keeps repeating itself. It's the phrase that always comes back. I then put the two together to create something entirely different, and I transposed both of the parts. And I chose the transpositions very carefully, so I created intervals that I wanted to have in the theme. And so altogether, this is what I created. This is the point in the piece where the opening theme has been heard, all the notes have been stated, and I really begin to play with the rhythmic character that's been built up. And it's on bass clarinet and cor anglais, which I can't wait to hear because it's going to be honking.
Goodness knows. So what, Karen, should that be quite loud, quite a big gesture?
Yeah, it carries over into the silence.
Yeah, so maybe a bit stronger than MF? Yeah. Tam-tam. Martyn, just a bit more going into 48. Call it forte. End of the bar. 4 and 5. Where we just passed there, that feels very quiet.
Okay.
Puny.
I still think you need to hammer this bit more. I'm not getting this, it's a melody, especially this top F sharp. I need to hear da-da.
It's because you've slurred it.
Okay, let's unslur it then.
Yeah.
Let's try and unslur it on the strings. I need to hear
it's clear here, isn't it? But not there.
Louder as well.
At home, it all sounds very different.
I can hear the ending, and that's something that bothered me for a while because you just get blocks. You know, you get to a point and you think, what happens next? And then suddenly you hear it all at once, in your head, so you don't hear every detail, but you hear a way forward. And I could really hear the ending, and I definitely want a tubular bell on the last note, because that's what opened it. And I wanted echoes of the beginning, and I could just hear it all then.
Break there, please. Take a break. Judged that ending very well. It's very, very good. Very effective, that ending.
In spite of Judith's reassurance, Karen isn't too happy.
Depressed. No, don't be depressed. It's always the same why people.
And I know.
And it's absolutely exact, isn't it? You know. The thing is that you know exactly how it goes, but they're still discovering how it goes. And also, have faith.
Have faith, exactly.
If you haven't worked with a professional orchestra before, it's astonishing the way everything improves with each rehearsal. You hear the first rehearsal and you think, my God, this is terrible, they're never going to be able to do it. Then the next one you think, oh, this is amazing, and then the performance is even better. I mean, really improves. But if you've never experienced that, it's very hard to believe it's going to happen.
Some things I didn't think would be as hard as they would be. Some things were much easier. And other things were brilliant, you know, but the percussion, for example, I wasn't quite sure how that was going to sound and come out, and I thought it was great. You know, I spent hours writing each note, and at the end of the page it lasts, 10 seconds. I think it's, I didn't expect it to be actually quite so short. But I think it works very well in terms of climax points and the way the overall structure of the piece. I was very pleased with that.
I write my ideas on paper first, and then transfer those ideas onto the computer screen, which I then can develop on the screen itself. But of course, with the computer, you've got the sound and the instruments as well, which helps to get the right feel of the piece. When just thinking in your head, you can actually see it on the screen and hear it as well. The piece is in 3 movements. The first movement uses the first 6 notes of the plain chant. Okay, and then my idea, same notes, just slightly elongated rhythm. Then there's an answering phrase after the first 4 bars, which is just a variation on the first bit. One of the techniques that I try to use to develop the theme would be imitation and development as well, obviously. So if I just play this for you, I can go through it and show you. So this is a variation on the first idea. Adding the second violin, imitating the first. Then the viola comes in as well, doing the same thing. Then the piano as well, which is once again using the 4ths and 5ths like in the piece itself. Then into the main theme, the main idea itself. using the scale, falling scale, as we used earlier. And trumpets bring in the idea of the first 4 notes again. I think there are lots of surprises when the orchestra actually plays it. It's okay up to a point on the computer, but when you hear real people playing it, it's much better, much more passion in it.
Yeah. Is it articulated or legato, or sostenuto, or more punchy than legato?
Yeah, that one page particularly is a bit sluggish. I don't know, this here seems really sluggish.
Well, I just took it as like Menemosa. I thought it sounded really rather nice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, we can go faster.
Can we bring the trombones out there a bit?
Yeah.
Because they got the melody in it. Perhaps rather than F there, maybe...
Start that on the song.
Yeah.
Okay. Trombones, please. 47. Could start a bit louder. It's the tune. 3 and...
That's better.
Having written his piece on computer, Nathan can get it to print out the orchestral parts. But sometimes the computerised layout makes them difficult to read.
Yes, we've already given him a lecture.
I know.
From here, and now there. So he's got it.
OK, I've been told, all right. I won't do it again, all right.
He won't do it again, he's just said so.
The plain chant is a very ancient type of music, and I've tried to reflect that in my second movement, where I've used more Eastern ideas.
It worries me, that note.
Yeah, it worries me.
I wondered whether you should have a few first violins doing it. On a very white note, no vibrato. Maybe try that. Yeah, it's... Think about that, or even having a harmonic in there. Even if you just had one violin playing a G, or adding some harmonics or something.
Nathan's also finding out that he's not given the players enough information about phrasing in their parts.
I'm sure it should be,
I think you might seriously, practically think about the amount of time you would have saved if you'd really got all that violin phrasing worked out.
The violas repeat this. It should be the same phrasing.
Yes.
I was trying to work this rhythm out. Does it add up, that bar? It doesn't... It should do. That's a beat.
Well, usually the computer won't accept it if it doesn't add up.
Do some calculations, please. make that bar work. Come along. That's what you're here for.
We can make it a quaver. The third movement is a more powerful, triumphant feel. It's rushing onwards all the time. Lots of octaves and unisons really pushing it on.
Three violins, one violin?
One.
It's one.
Yeah.
Which is a solo. You want one.
Solo. Oh,
Solo
God.
for one.
Sorry.
Even your computer should know that.
It's my fault, that one. I admit that's my fault. It's not what I expected at all. I've been listening to a computer for what, 8 months, playing it back, and then all of a sudden you hear this, live people playing, and it brings it to life in certain ways. In other ways, it's not quite what you expect. There are lots of parts you don't hear with the orchestra playing. With the computer, you press a button, turn it up. With the human players, they don't know which is the main part to be louder, so you've got to tell them. I think communication is another point where I haven't had much experience.
Sorry.
I wish more composers would stop relying on the computers for the sound quality. I mean, a computer cannot produce the very human resource of an orchestra.
And also the machine, of course, internally balances everything for you. So, you know, it's like the harpsichord thing in Thom's piece, you know. You can hear it on the computer.
Sure.
Of course, when you get in an acoustic, you don't know what's going to happen. And the other thing I think is that it stops you just going into that kind of inner space of your imagination and just letting that run free. You start to become kind of bound by the machine in a way. It should serve you always. You should never serve it.
To expect an orchestra, a living, breathing body of musicians, to come up with exactly the same precise relationships of tempo, everything, pitch, it's not quite realistic. And I hope, again, that's something Nathan will have learnt. But having said that, he handles the orchestra extremely well. He really knows how to write for the orchestra.
On the last evening, we all had time to relax, but music still seemed to be the centre of our conversations.
But a lot of the time, it has been said, in film certainly, and in theatre, and in dance, I think, the music ends up playing a subsidiary role. You say what? You say what?
Right. Went back to going to football games again.
To our bed to drink some milk.
You can't get anything different than sitting in your study.
It's quite funny to sit on the
playing along with 50,000 others screaming and bawling you.
I'm writing a serious bassoon concerto. I wanted to keep the natural qualities of the bassoon.
Good morning, everyone.
Day 3, and Martyn rehearses each piece for the last time. Thom Petty can find out what difference the harpsichord amplification and the wooden guiro make.
Could you hear the harpsichord?
No, I couldn't actually.
Be able to hear it on the radio.
They can hear it up there.
Yes.
They're all out. They're all done.
And now Fraser can discover whether all his homework has been worthwhile.
If you make notes and remember what the problems are, we'll deal with it afterwards, rather than keep stopping and starting. It's so embarrassing for all of us. Okay? Is that all right with you? Get the hot seat then. Fraser didn't want this to happen, but they're fussing about dynamics.
Some of them have got a poco crescendo at the beginning. Does that apply to everyone?
I've basically gone through, put the dynamics in now, so what is in the dynamics is what's read. That's sort of a general...
I mean, it sounded all right to me.
Yeah, it sounded fine.
Sounded very good.
The only thing fine.
to keep playing that.
What you've got in the parts is now right. So if no one else does it, don't worry about it. You carry on.
Fraser, do you think the piece went better this time round?
It definitely went better this morning. Yeah, it woke me up as well, which I needed. I was sitting there beforehand, just completely dazed, being up all night. I got the same clothes on as I had yesterday as well. Just sat in my room and wrote out more parts. So I'm glad I did it though. It was definitely worth it.
When did you stop?
About 10 minutes before I got the cab, and then came straight down here and threw the parts out. So.
A real labour of love then?
Yeah. Because it had to be done, and it definitely made a big difference in the end as well, so I'm certainly glad I did it.
When we first gave you that plain song many months ago now, I remember there was some anxiety about the idea of working with plain song. How do you feel now about the plain song, now that you've written the piece and it's sort of out there?
One thing that everybody commented on when hearing everybody else's piece was where was the plain song. You could always point it out at certain points, and some people's more obvious than other ones, but there was always, we were conscious of listening out for it because we knew what it sounded like.
What about you, Tom? Because you kind of reacted against it, really.
Well, I think if it's such an abstract thing, we can do anything. We can hide it away. I mean, who knows? One of us might not have used it at all, and you might not even know, so...
I think it's surprising just how much you miss. When you're writing a score, you see everything and you hear it at the same time, and you don't realise that you don't hear perhaps quite the dynamics that are needed. You don't hear perhaps the odd accent or the odd line that needs to come through. You think, oh, they'll know that because you wrote it. And you get a few surprises. I think we've all experienced surprises that way.
And the same problem with the bowing as well. As Karen said, you expect them to do it, you're thinking, well, I know how to do it, so they should know as well. But I missed out quite a bit of bowing, and I think I should have put that in.
The thing is, you know, the score presents you when you are not there. That's all there is of you afterwards, the score. So, you know, if the score is incomplete or ambiguous, then you've only got yourselves to blame, really, if you are not then presented in hopefully the best way, because it's always going to be a question of interpretation, the score.
That's the hardest thing, I think, not being in it.
Yes.
You know, the only existence that this piece has been in my head for the last 6 months, and then now suddenly it has a life all of its own apart from me. And I think I always find that hard.
Sometimes it's best to step back and be a little less proprietorial about your music when it gets to this stage, because it's very hard to let go. It's your baby after all. But it's got to grow up and go into the world on its own, and you know, it's got to...
And to have bad experiences.
After months of work for our 5 young composers, their weekend ended with a concert. Martyn Brabbins and the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra recorded their 5 works for Radio 3.
I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know how the workshop would work, so it's all been a pleasant surprise, I think.
I think the biggest lesson that I've actually learned is to be more meticulous and go through the whole thing thoroughly once it has been finished.
As a composer, my main ambition is to eventually write music that someone can recognise as me. I think I'm only a toddler where that's concerned.
In the end, you have to let the performers perform it their way. Their interpretation is important as well. They may have created it, but they are going to perform it to the public.
This piece is really intimate for me, and to come suddenly to this big hall and all these people playing it, and you know, half of it doesn't sound right at all, and you're trying to change things. I found it difficult, honestly.
After the concert, it was time for players and composers to wind down after another successful Lloyds Bank Young Composers Workshop. But there was still some good news to come from Hugh MacDonald, director of the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra.
We'd like to ask each of them to write another piece for us, so that in the next 2 years at least, we'll have the chance to hear how these splendid talents develop. So congratulations to all of them, and thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
If the younger generation are able to write pieces of this quality, then I think the future really does look bright for contemporary music. I really do believe that we've got some of the finest young talents in this country.